Hello guys, say if dem dey open your nyash locally, e no go too pain you, but if your nyash come go open internationally, that one be say your own don finish. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're watching this video from and the time you're gonna see this video. I remember my humble self, the Ike Man. Please, if you are coming across my videos for the first time, I would like you to share my videos, like, comment, and follow my page if you are not following me. Remember to send stars to support what I'm doing here. David Hundeyi, this is a very breaking news. This is one of the hot breaking news so far. David Hundeyi and this particular international journalist, George, has opened the nyash of the president where we get now internationally. I want you to watch this particular video to the end. You will know the reason why our president come the push Wella to go for Niger to intervene with our military. Say I go come there ask question, wetin go be our benefit if our president carry our military go to this Niger? Why you go use your own people? Why you go allow other people outside to be pushing you to go and give woto to your own person as well? I want you to watch this exposition where happened here. David Hundeyi and this particular man, you get one video I watch about this man before this one. This man also opened the nyash of our president. Say too many things there for the head of this our president. Both internationally, just that some people internationally just they keep quiet because they know wetin then they get from allowing such person where they know say democratically, constitutionally, it never supposed be on that seat. Because now that kind of way where they get things where they get from Africa and Nigeria. I would like you to watch this video to the end. As I'm watching it, don't forget to do the needful. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and follow my page if you're not following me. We move. p0se is coming, and we shall see a new Nigeria come to our face. We move.
David Hundeyi is an award-winning investigative journalist and the founder of West Africa Weekly, and he joins us now. David, thank you for joining us. One of the more anticipated interviews of the mother of all talk shows. Thank you for agreeing to talk with us. We wanted to get your in-depth analysis of the situation in Nigeria. But first, can you clear something up? Was I unfair on Tinubu when I described him as a bag man?
I actually think you didn't go far enough. So as you may know, I'm the journalist who is basically responsible for putting this story out into the public domain. More recently, there was a story that I published last year on this issue, which became the basis for all of this. And in that story, the headline of the story is actually "From Drug Lord to Presidential Candidates." I described him as a drug lord. I think that's a fair description based on the evidence that is available. So calling him a bagman is actually a bit tame because it implies that there is still some sort of separation between him and the drug trader. Okay, he wasn't actually directly involved in handling heroin; he just handled the money. But actually, that's not what the evidence says at all. If you actually read through the court papers, it becomes very clear that this person was intimately involved in the heroin trade in Chicago. For whatever reason, the U.S. authorities have chosen to sit on their hands. And I guess we'll come to that later in the show anyway.
Yes. So how does such a man, even if he was just a bag man, but worse if he was more, how does such a man end up as the president of a mighty country like Nigeria?
Short answer, he doesn't, or he's not supposed to. But I guess we live in very unusual times. We live in a time when it's become increasingly clear that certain countries, i.e. the US, are becoming more and more brazen about their willingness to basically set everyone else on fire to keep themselves warm. So in this case, it is increasingly evident. If you've read my story, if you watched my documentary, if you read the reporting by kids Keith Klarenberg of Grey Zone News. If you read the court documents, if you've done your research, it becomes very clear that this person, who is supposedly sitting in Aso Rock as the president of Nigeria, isn't actually working for Nigeria. They essentially have a U.S. intelligence asset occupying the office of Nigeria's president, and the U.S. authorities are well aware of his history, of his past. I personally am involved in at least 2 legal processes as we speak, trying to force the U.S. authorities to make the contents of his FBI file public, because there is an FBI file on him, and we get tossed around a lot. Due to privacy concerns, we're not going to let you have this information. And it's like, well, this is the president of a sovereign country. So I think we're well past the point of, invoking privacy concerns now, because the foreign policy decisions or the local policy decisions made by this guy potentially affect the lives of 200 million people, even more, as we're seeing now in the case of the war with Niger, which is determined to have potentially an entire quarter of Africa could be going up in flames, because we essentially have a president whom, first of all, was never qualified to run for that office, should never have been on that ballot, legally speaking. And most importantly, we did not vote for him. He did not win the election. And based on the data that the US government itself paid for, the polls that the US government itself, the pre-election polling and research the US government itself paid for, based on the reports that were put out by the EU Observer Commission, it's evidence, it's visible to the blind and audible to the deaf, that not only did this guy not win the election, he wasn't even close. And yet, some of these powerful countries, shall we say, have simply decided that, look, we have foreign policy objectives, we have foreign policy goals, and one of these goals is, for whatever reason, to keep our thumb on West Africa. And the way to keep our thumb on West Africa is to ensure that whoever is in power in Nigeria is someone who is completely supine, completely pliable, someone who essentially can be blackmailed, because that's my reading of the situation. So essentially right now, Nigeria is sovereign in name, but we are essentially under some sort of foreign occupation. That's the way I see it, because the person who is wielding the powers of state as president is not working in the interest of the country. He's not working for us. We didn't put him there. We didn't vote for him. And he's not answering to us. He's answering to Paris. He's answering to DC, London to a lesser extent. He's answering to everyone except us, the 200 million people of Nigeria. So where does that leave us? I mean, who knows?
Well, is there extant a legal system in Nigeria that is at least uncompromised to the extent that they will do their duty and reverse what is clearly a kangaroo hijacking of the presidency of a great country? I mean, the ballot rigging and all the rest, all of this is in court. The man, Mr. Obi, who came second, he's pursuing it. Is there any chance of judicial resolution of this matter, or are the people going to have to take to the streets?
So I don't believe that the Nigerian judiciary actually has it in them, and the reason I say I don't believe it is it's much more than just a case of ballot rigging, right? This won't be the first Nigerian election to be rigged. The issue here is, over and above that, there is a surplus of evidence that makes it very clear that this person should never even have been on the ballot. This is someone whose university degree certificates submitted to the Electoral Commission are obvious forgery. It's an obvious forgery. I did a story on this in November. It's such an obvious forgery. You can actually trace where it came from. It came from a cheap online forgery service called diplomamakers.com. Right? This degree certificate has grammatical errors on it. Right? We took the extraordinary step of actually submitting a subpoena to the supposed university he went to, Chicago State University, for the records of this person known as Bola Tinubu. And the results that came back were total variance with the things that he submitted. INEC submitted a bunch of forgeries, right? So there's controversy over even the basic identity of this person. Right? We have an actual criminal here. And this isn't something we just came to light recently. This is something which, as far back as last year, when I did a story on this actually went to court. We actually took this to the Federal High Court in Abuja, that this is a national security problem here. We essentially have someone who we don't even know who this person is, right? All we know about this person is this person used to be a drug dealer. Somehow or the other bought his way into the Nigerian political mainstream. And somehow this person is about to contest an election on the platform of the ruling party. And here is evidence suggesting that this person has committed all kinds of fraud. He's committed identity theft. He has committed forgeries. He has committed multiple perjuries. And what happened was not a single judge agreed to take on the case. So the case is pretty much just timed out. It just sat at the court. It wasn't assigned to a judge. All the judges ran away. Nobody wanted to touch it. So he ended up running during the election, which he still lost anyway. And then somehow at 4 a.m. when everyone was asleep, he was declared winner. So now it's so I don't believe that the Nigerian judiciary has.
Many of our American audience will be familiar with that phenomenon. Indeed, I'm familiar with it myself in English elections in which I had an interest. The 4 a.m. Delivery of just enough ballots to win is one issue. But as you say, that has happened many times in Nigerian politics. I suppose the big question is why the ruling party was reduced to picking him as their nominee. Couldn't they come up with somebody better than him? A drug dealer from Chicago?
Well, I guess they were constrained because the political deal, if you like, the political transaction, which brought the former President Buhari, to power, was essentially a temporary merger of two remarkably different political formations. So if you can think of it in terms of, say, 2010 in the UK, because I was in the UK at the time. So the deal that put the Conservative Party in power, where there was the Conservative power, and then there was the, I think it was the Independent Party. What was it called?
The Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. And no one expected that there would ever be any sort of, merger between the two. But there was a partnership, Nick Clegg and David Cameron, and, the rest is history. Something similar happened in 2015, in 2013 actually, where the party now known as the APC was sort of cobbled together, a loose coalition. So it was the CPC, which was like a northern, a northern interest party, and then there was the so-called ACN, the Action Congress, which was a more southwestern party. These two historically are chalk and cheese. But for the purpose of seizing power from the then ruling PDP, they sort of cobbled together a coalition. And I guess the deal was, okay, that's Buhari from the CPC, you get to rule for 8 years, right? And then after you, it's going to be my turn, since I'm the one making this possible. I'm the one putting up the money, because he has endless amounts of money. Obviously, we have an idea of where that money comes from. I'm putting up the money. I'm making all of this possible. I have the international connections, because he's deeply connected with, for whatever reason, with the democratic establishment in the US. As if you read my story, I'm sure you know he's deeply connected with Hillary Clinton via his good friend Gilbert Shaguri. So he has all these international connections. In fact, the campaign manager that ran Buhari's campaign in 2015 was none other than David Axelrod, the same guy who ran Obama's campaign. So he has all these international connections. He has all this money. So he essentially made Buhari the president on the assumption that after 8 years it's going to be his term. And that's exactly what happened. So essentially, the entire country of Nigeria, all 200 million human beings, was essentially the subject of a trade between this guy and a political formation in the north. Okay, if you give me this thing, if you come into a coalition with me, I'm going to let you have 8 years, and after that, I get to be president. In fact, it's no coincidence that his campaign tagline, and this was literal, this is unironical, you can confirm this from any Nigerian you speak to, his campaign tagline was Emi Lokan, which, if you translate that to English, it literally means "it's my turn." That was his campaign tagline, and that was very unironic. He actually meant that it's his turn. So his entire thing was, well, I gave you people the presidency for 8 years. Now it's your turn to reward me for giving you this thing. So it's my turn, essentially. So that's unfortunately that's the level of Nigerian politics. There's no ideology. It's just horse trading, and that's it.
Well, that might have succeeded if this new Niger crisis had not erupted, because, well, quite frankly, if he confines his criminality to robbing the people of Nigeria, that's just a matter for the people of Nigeria. But if he's about to plunge the whole of West Africa into the quagmire, into a forest fire that will burn, that becomes an international matter of some importance. Now, why has he chosen to be the spearhead of the obvious French and US attempt to intervene in Niger, even if it means all-out war with Niger, Burkina Faso, with Mali, and who knows where else? And will the Nigerians put up with that?
So, two reasons. First of all, internal reasons. Under the Nigerian constitution, if the country is in a state of war, then the president or the head of state essentially becomes a king. Essentially, it becomes impossible to remove the head of state. So there's as you mentioned, there's a legal process in courts. Even though I don't really have faith in the Nigerian judiciary to do the obvious thing, which is to disqualify him, because he clearly should never have been on the ballot. This person is a criminal, but there is still a chance that something could happen there. So this could be a method of sort of ensuring that base is covered, that, regardless of whatever decision is arrived at by the courts, that just by virtue of being in a state of war, he becomes essentially unremovable, which is permitted by the Nigerian constitution. The second thing is, it's clear to anyone who has I think a functioning pair of eyes that the French and the Americans are, for lack of a better term, blackmailing him. Because clearly, he's not really in control here. If you followed the situation from day one, it's been clear that the decisions that he has made are not the decisions of someone who has actually thought this through. These are the decisions of a puppet who has someone's mouth in his ear, someone's hand up his arse. Pardon my French. So, for example, 2 weeks ago, when this crisis initially erupted, under Nigerian law, a president is not permitted to deploy the Nigerian military outside of Nigeria without approval from the Senate, from the Parliament. It's not permitted. But he tried to circumvent that. He illegally deployed Nigerian special forces into Niger, and certain people within the Nigerian military actually were not on board with this at all. And they took an unprecedented step, right? They actually leaked a top secret document from the defense headquarters to me, right? Bear in mind that I'm viewed very much as a journalist who is almost like an enemy of state in Nigeria. So for the Nigerian military to actually leak such a document to me, I think that tells you everything you need to know about, how this war is viewed even within the ranks of the Nigerian military. So after this document was leaked and I put it out, I was accused of, treason, you're betraying soldiers' locations, you should be picked up, blah, 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 blah. But it achieved, that leak achieved its goal. It actually stopped that illegal invasion. And then he went to the Senate to ask for approval. The Senate turned him down. So now the tactic that has been adopted is to go hide behind ECOWAS and claim that, well, ECOWAS has approved the deployment of this thing called a standby force, right? First of all, who is ECOWAS? ECOWAS is Nigeria, right? So it's like saying, I don't know, if you're talking about the UK, right? And say there's something relating to football in the UK, and you say, the British team. No, there's England, which is by far the dominant force, and then there's Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, but England is the dominant force. It's a similar thing within ECOWAS. There is no such thing as ECOWAS in the real sense of it. There is Nigeria. Every single time that there's been a military intervention by ECOWAS, it's essentially been the Nigerian military being deployed. So that's like the latest attempt to sort of end run the refusal by the Nigerian parliament to grant him his war, because he obviously desperately wants this war. And the sheer amount of desperation that is being displayed here makes it clear to me that this isn't something that came out of his own head, right? And the noises coming out of Paris and Washington, D.C. just make this all the more obvious. You essentially have President Macron almost issuing edicts. For many years, the French have sort of tried to mask their openly colonial positioning within West Africa. I remember sometime in 2020, I personally even wrote an article in the Africa Report, where I essentially pushed back on the idea that the French have direct colonial control of Africa. I critiqued the idea, right? Because, based on the understanding that I have there, look, the France of Charles de Gaulle and the France of today are, remarkably different countries, and it no longer sort of captures the French public imagination to have Africa under its thumb or anything. So for many years, that's the image that France has tried to curate in Africa. But this time around, it's shed all pretense. It's, as I said, visible to the blind and audible to the deaf. It's almost like, Macron screaming at Nigeria that, hey, go get me back my territory, and it's like, hey, Niger is a sovereign independent country, isn't it? Or it's supposed to be a sovereign independent country, isn't it? Why is there this much, angst? Because they essentially said, go home, we don't want you anymore. So it's clear that there are outside forces that are not just involved here, but that are actually in control, actually in the driving seat, which puts us Nigerians in a uniquely dangerous situation, because, as you correctly stated, such a war wouldn't just be a problem within Niger and Nigeria. The entire West African sub-region is going to go up in flames. You've mentioned that the Malians, the Burkinabes, the Guineans have already signaled their support for Niger. Algeria has already sent a signal that it's going to stand with Niger as well. So potentially you could end up having an entire belt of chaos across the Sahel. Right? Sudan is currently in chaos. Ethiopia and Eritrea are currently having issues. And as you're coming west, you're seeing that potential for an entire band of chaos. And the Russians are somewhere in amidst all of this, allegedly, and they also have an interest in this somewhere too. So ultimately, regardless of what happens or does not happen to the US and French interests in the region, we are the ones who are going to suffer the consequences. And this is why I've taken such personal interest in this issue. This isn't just some airy-fairy political discourse, right? This is something that's going to have real on-the-ground consequences. The Nigerian border with Niger is over 1,000 kilometers long. It's the longest single land border that Nigeria has. The distinction between Nigerians and Nigerians is almost impossible to make, because again, that border was drawn on Wilhelmstrasse in Berlin, right? It's not a border that actually makes any sense. It's just a line in the sand that was drawn at the Berlin Conference. It's the same people on both sides of the border. And for the most part, it's not even a demarcated border. So if you're going to go to war with a country that you cannot functionally demarcate yourself from, how does that even work in the first place? So ultimately, it's going to devolve into some form of ethnic genocide. But that's almost nailed on, guaranteed to happen. And once that starts to happen, the last remaining band of stability in West Africa is going to go. And then you're going to have essentially the entire top half of Africa, going from Libya all the way down to the Central African Republic. The entire top half of Africa is going to be one contiguous band of absolute mayhem, right? And that's close to 400 million people whose lives are going to be thrown into utter chaos. And why? Because the US has a drone base in Agadez, or France wants to keep on mining uranium in Niger. Is that worth 2 or 3, 400 million lives? I don't think it is. Which is why we're having conversations like this, because clearly we're not at the point where the independence or the sovereignty that we probably thought we had, it's clear that we don't have. So maybe, I don't know, we're living through the 1960s all over again. So maybe there needs to be another Pan-African liberation movement. I don't know. But clearly that's the situation we found ourselves in now. We're literally being ruled by a vassal, by an illegitimate vassal who does not answer to us.
This podcast was brought to you by BG Media App and barglobal.net. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. It does help support our productions. Also, please download the BG Media app to access the best works of the world's authors rendered in audiobooks, along with great experience through music, podcasts, and vodcasts.